Now, our reporter Heidi Giokos, as always, has been following the story very closely for us and joins us this morning in person. It's been a while, Heidi. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, some might say, when they've heard this news, that it's a long time coming. But what are the details contained in the severance package document that you've been privy to?
So I think it's important to note that there has been word out there that SAA could possibly be facing liquidation after government failed to provide a 10 billion rand additional funding to the airline. The business rescue practitioners have been in desperate need of this, and they are basically saying that this was the last resort for them to shut the airline down. But because they have no additional funding, we've seen this document where it's an agreement between SAA and a number of unions, of course representing the over 4,000 workers at the airline. And this basically shows that it's the end of the road for the airline, because they are basically saying that they're going to terminate all work contracts for these workers. It's about 4,700 of them, and they are basically just outlining how this process is going to work. But what's interesting about this document is that they speak about the selling of assets and disposing of assets, and that's very important when it comes to liquidation. And when you dispose of assets, there's a specific value that's attached to these assets. And if you just look at how the market is now, the aviation industry is not doing well because nobody can travel due to COVID-19, and if the value is not what is needed for these severance packages, it's going to be a tough one for workers, because they might only be paid a certain amount from these, when it comes to these packages, and it might only be paid over a 6-month basis. So they have outlined the conditions to this. I think it's 1 week pay per year or something like that. I just need to get that exact.
Yes, from what I understand, and I suppose I might be incorrect because I'm not an expert, there are often severance packages that say you get 1 week pay for every year that you've served.
Yes.
Which obviously will be brought into question as these negotiations to a potential agreement continues.
Yes, most definitely, an unpaid leave and perhaps the 13th check, dependent on the conditions. So, I mean, it's quite a lengthy document, and we've just been trying to read through this. But basically, it just goes to show that it's going to be a very tough road for the workers, for the airline, for government, because they are going to have to determine how and who they pay first once they dispose of all these assets.
Now, the document that we have says agreement at the top between South African Airways, and then it names a number of unions that would have members that are affected by it. Easier said than done, though. Just because it says agreement on the document doesn't mean that that is the case. What are we hearing so far from the different unions?
And that's the thing, Marcel, it all depends on how the unions accept this, and if workers are going to accept this. We did see workers coming out in December and saying we're not going to accept this retrenchment process. They went on strike for a number of days, which heavily affected the airline. And it's going to be interesting to see how unions accept this. When we've reached out to unions over the last few days, just to get clarity on what they are going to do, their plan moving forward, they've indicated that they're unable to speak at this stage. And it's clearly because of this document. They are unable to speak about how they are going to move this forward, and they've obviously needed to communicate with the workers and just explain to them what has happened. It's truly going to be devastating to see this airline shutting down.
And in terms of numbers, are we looking at about 4,000 members of that of SAA staff that will be affected?
Yes, so it's going to be about 4,700 of them that are going to be affected. From the document that we received about two months ago, it was a proposed business rescue plan. They did say that Mango would not be affected by this. One must remember that Mango is basically a sister company of SAA, but they have not been affected by this. They will probably have to pick up a number of the routes that SAA has been operating. So luckily that's not being affected, but it's still a large number that's going out.
And all of it against the backdrop of this devastating lockdown that's impacting on so many families already.